Okay. So that's running. And headphones on. Okay. We'll start the recording, okay? Started. Okay.
Yeah.
And 1, 2, 3, clap. Welcome to the second episode of the Self-Centered Woman podcast. And I wanted to make it clear right off the bat that the Self-Centered Woman podcast is not necessarily for women only. Of course, that's probably the bulk of my clientele, but we want you to know that we honor men and we're happy to have you. As long as you're practicing the 4 Seeds of Self-Care, you are welcome anytime. And if you didn't know, Justin, the 4 Seeds of Self-Care are eating well, sleeping well, having a consistent meditation / prayer practice, and exercise, right? And when you're doing all of those things, that your brain is as healthy as it can be, and then you are accomplishing your goals easier, fostering more meaningful relationships, better connecting with your community. I do not expect that your sleep is on point at the moment. Justin has just become a father for the second time. How many children did you ever think that you would have?
Oh, 0. It wasn't that I was ever thinking that I wouldn't have children. I just wasn't thinking either way, really. So, none of the
Through
relationships.
most of your life, how long did it take for you to actually start thinking?
When I started dating Rebecca, we just started talking about it. And when the conversation came up, the thoughts were there. So, I mean, I was probably just too immature to think about it at the time before that.
Right.
Or any time before that.
How long have you two been together?
Since 2016. So.
And how old is the baby now?
Well, first son's 4.5, and then Arwen's coming on 3 months.
3 months.
Yeah.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Let me just take a break and say that this episode of the Self-Centered Women podcast is sponsored by Lily Nutrition. Lily Nutrition, live your life intentionally. Go to lilynutrition.com using promo code self-centered to get a discount off all products. That's Lily Nutrition, live your life intentionally. So again, Justin Michael, thank you for being on my podcast. I really appreciate it, and I think it's been a long time coming because I have really been in awe of you ever since the last time we did the back bend yoga pose with your first pregnancy on the floor, right in this very spot.
Yeah.
And I cannot do that anymore because I also have since had 2 children, but I will get back to it. Obviously, you're on here because I'm so impressed with your yoga practice, and I want to know, first of all about how did you come to be such an avid practitioner of yoga, and what changed for you very recently through your eye injury? First, start with the yoga.
Well, it began with me wanting to climb rocks as a young 20-year-old, and I was climbing too aggressively and exercising too aggressively. Just a little awareness of fitness, and I was just very active, not anything passive in my life at the time. And so because of that, I started throwing my back out and getting injuries. And so with injuries, I was also in the environment of a lot of new age hippie people, and I ended up spending some time living in Black Mountain in North Carolina with some hippies who had their own earth ships and were living off the grid themselves. And
what's an earth ship?
An earth ship is a helmet ship. There's different variations, but an earth ship is, in this case, it was half straw bale, half impact tires filled with dirt, building out of the earth in a way and situated in a way that keeps the interior of the building like 70, upper 60 degrees throughout the whole year. And so it's a very primitive way of building a home, and a really fun way to build a home if you're a hippie. And so in Asheville and Oregon. Those are some hot spots. You'll have a lot of people that'll build tiny homes in an Earthship-like way in their backyard and have them Airbnb or rented out.
I actually went on a first solo trip to Asheville. I spent 3 days there by myself. I went there to write, and I also made myself go out, in public by myself, and I met very interesting people. It was really a great time, so I can imagine, the chance encounters you had.
Yeah, well, the person I was staying with in the mountains, I met at a store called the Himalayan Imports. This is all very ironic, actually, because I am now really fond of the Himalayas, and I like going there myself, and I practice from a lineage, internal practices from a lineage that's based from the Himalayas. And so, but I met this fellow who called himself Govinda, and he was working for the family that owned that store whenever they weren't in there. And so I met him at the store, and he's like, "Hey, just come to my property. We're living off the grid with my wife. I got a dog, and just come stay there." At the time, I was living out of my van, going from climbing spot to climbing spot. So the idea of a somewhat stable place to hang out in the mountains was really nice. So
and so you just did it? You just went?
Oh yeah, he was a really sweet guy. Well, at the time.
It reminds me of when I graduated from college, my granny took me on an Alaskan cruise. I tell this story all the time, so it's time you all knew. I happened to meet a guy on the trip, on the cruise, who lived like less than a mile from my house. And I lived in Las Vegas at the time. We were all the way in Alaska. Well, we had a great time the whole week. He brought weed, and we,
of course,
enjoyed. But when we docked, we went on a mission to find some weed, and we met a guy that owned the bicycle shop who invited us to his house. And that was a big mistake. Yeah.
We learned, don't we?
And we're like, we need to get back to the boat now. Something along the lines of telling us about how dense the forest was, and that some people go in there and they never again come out. We're like, okay, you're gonna go now. But Govinda turned out to be a good witch.
I can't speak for him now. It's a long time ago. I know he's very active in the yoga community, but he was traveling to Asheville to work at the Himalayan Imports, and then he had his other activities in yoga studios and what have you. But what I saw of him was whatever he was expressing at home to his, at the time, female and dog. And so I was injured with a back injury. I think it was the second time I had done this, and he was doing this practice called the Tibetan 5 rites, and he was doing that one religiously. It's basically 5 vinyasas, very, very basic. The first one is spinning in circles, but each vinyasa, which is a movement linked with breath, so inhale, extension, exhale, contraction. I mean, this is a vinyasa. Inhale, extension, exhale, contraction. So that's vinyasa. But basically, there are these 5 whole body vinyasa movements you do 21 times each, and the hippie slang was that by doing that, it's the most simple and direct way to activate all your chakras. I know way more better now about working with chakras, and a lot more aware of the seriousness of those kinds of things, and that you can't just do vinyasas to activate biofields in your body as much as we want to. It's a lot more work for that. But at the time, I was 21, very young, and he was in his mid-30s, which to me felt a little bit wiser, you know. And so he was really good with what he was sharing, but he was also battling his own demons, and he had a lot of aggression. And I witnessed that without him knowing that I witnessed it. And once he found out, eventually he asked me to leave. So
once he asked you to leave.
Well, this is a repeating pattern in my life with a bunch of people that I've spent intimate time with who treated me as a student and expressed themselves as somewhat of a guide or teacher. But generally I would find or see through experience the very qualities that I myself am trying to work out. And so when you see that the teacher can't work it out themselves, it usually is a sign that it's time to move on. And so for me, it's kind of like I recognize it, and then I didn't even leave immediately because I was getting connected with other people in the environment, and I was getting more tied with other people in the environment. But then whenever he expressed that he wanted me to leave, I was like, oh, well, I gotta go. If the main guy in the corner of the mountain doesn't want me around. To me, I felt like he probably saw me as a threat because I saw aspects of himself that he didn't want other people to really be fond of. Because
what is your spiritual background?
Oh my gosh. Well, I was raised in the Christian church, a non-denominational church, Woodstock Community Church. Mm-hmm. And so I called that very loose Christianity, entertainment-based Christianity. Mm-hmm. I call it that now based off of my personal experience and growth in yoga. I mean, before I just, Christianity. Mm-hmm. But I look at religion and spiritual practices based off of internal activity, and the general dilemma is that yes, we're born sinful people and we have the potential of being very sinful. We already know that. But we also have the potential of being kind, compassionate, and loving, and we also know that. But not always have complete control of the other, the latter, the compassion and love. It's usually easy to express the love and compassion whenever we feel good enough, but whenever we don't, then it's not so easy. And so generally I saw different religions as some form of as a form of platform to inspire the latter and to try to avoid any negative emotions. And so based off of that, I was just looking at, well, who's getting the best results and who's actually becoming more compassionate, who's not. And so I didn't really feel tied or connected to Christianity. It was just what I was completely surrounded by. It's really hard. I just don't want to fool anybody. I don't really now ever have considered myself a Christian because I was never like, I'm Christian. Mm-hmm. I was like, I'm Christian because my dad's a pastor, my mom is leading the youth group, and everybody says so. It was more of a conversation that was inherited than an actual trust in the belief, because they were demanding blind faith, and it was never really easy for me to deliver, so it was always more of a white lie, and it wasn't until I was old enough to.
What other kind of faith is not blind?
So
that's a question. The other question that I have for you is Christianity versus Jesus. And we talk about the guide, that's what I was thinking of. Okay, well, that guide asked you to leave because he started to see something in himself, but there was never any imperfection in Jesus. When we're talking about the man, the qualities, was he a turnoff?
Jesus?
Yeah.
So for me, Jesus, again, I'm not gonna take my shoes off.
Take your shoes off. Stay a while.
Yeah. So for me, whenever the internet was accessible for me, I was looking up for evidence for everything, for the ark, for every story that I was raised on. Mm-hmm. And all the evidence I found was very clearly made by people. Mm-hmm. And long story short, I just couldn't have blind faith. I needed more proof. And so when it comes to the perfection of Jesus, I see it more, and I am saying this based off of what I know and feel now. Mm-hmm. But at the time, I didn't have words for it. I was just too young. I was just feeling things and moving based off of feeling. And so what I conclude now is that the way I see Jesus is basically like a myth. And there's nothing wrong with the myth compared to a historical, evidence-based situation. what I noticed based off of my experience is that what is wrong is our attachment. Because our attachment to either historical evidence or not is usually what develops negative emotions. Because when anything challenges our attachment to whatever happened or did not happen, usually provokes negative emotions over positive ones. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. I know a lot of people feel like it's really good to defend something that is, in their opinion, righteous, but I am coming from the point of just pure questioning and analyzing and breaking things down. And so for me, it was like, okay, so based off of what I'm personally finding, I personally don't feel like there's any evidence that he existed. Now, that doesn't mean that all of this that has been created in his name is bad, but I can also say that a lot of it has created very much bad. And so, and I'm just regarding genocide of people based off of not believing in Jesus. And you don't see that much in certain cultures, but it is in almost every culture as well. And so the potential of good in every religion is there. But the potential of demonic activity is also there. And I feel like what I've noticed based off of my experience in short 33 years, that the root of the demonic behavior is coming from attachment to what we want the story to be versus looking at whether it's a myth or historical context, why we're even wanting to worship it. And in this case, Christianity's case, because we have hope that we can be compassionate, or that there is compassion, that there is unconditional love. And why would we even bring up that conversation? Because even in our most personal loving relationships, we battle with unconditional love towards people. We say that we are unconditionally loving, and we can say it all we want. I love so and so unconditionally, for sure. But in your personal life, that's not true. There's lots of conditions.
Well, I always say too, the idea, for me, I believe that, altruism is not a real thing.
Yeah.
That we never do anything strictly out of the kindness of our hearts, even if they're very good and noble things. Because if you believe in the law of attraction, then you know that it's a no-brainer. The more good you do, the more you can expect good to follow you. But that's not a bad thing. We don't have to villainize those things at all. And so then, how was yoga something, that practice is something that is a spiritual practice that rings more true than Christianity, or is it a separate issue for you? Like, do you have a belief system?
Oh yes, I'm practicing Buddhism.
Okay.
But when I say practicing Buddhism, I don't mean that I am in the religion of Buddhism. And I know Buddhism is treated like a religion, and I know that it is a religion, and I know Christianity is treated like a religion, and I know it is a religion, but I also know that there's Christians that are practicing compassion. And not everyone is. And this is what I'm really getting at, is that it's not that I excluded Christianity from my life, because I can't uproot where I came from. What I'm saying is that whenever I felt the opposite of what it represents, I naturally didn't want to hang out. And what I gravitated towards was striving towards what we talk about: compassion, love, unconditionally, and looking for communities of people that are striving for that as well. And the more I look for them, the more I found it in more Buddhist communities. And I'm not saying that Buddhism is better than Christianity. I'm just saying that the structure of the theory and practice of Buddhism generates more compassionate individuals than Christianity. How many enlightened people are coming out of Christianity compared to Buddhism is, it depends on what you mean by enlightened. And so Uh, for me, what I am basing all this off of is pure primal instinct. When I saw my friend lashing out on his woman and blaming the dog for his inability to control his emotions and being violent.
Yeah.
I mean, from how wild boys get. And so and then me saying, oh my gosh, like he hasn't conquered what I am wanting to conquer. How could I conquer it with him? I didn't, and so I was almost like ready to go already anyways. And so when I'm with even my yoga teacher, one of my yoga teachers that I was inspired by as well, same qualities appeared within them: addiction, anger, resentment, and lots of negative qualities. And so I found a teacher who was even more disciplined. And then up the ladder, finding more disciplined and compassionate individuals until I found who is my ultimate teacher, who I find no faults in. And he lives the most simple life. And the reason why it's hard to find faults in him is because he has very little experience in our culture and samsaric lifestyle, because he was raised in a small village in outside of Kathmandu in Nepal and the Himalayas. And since then he's grown up with very little and grown up in the monastery, so grown up from this space of detachment from the world and practice of that. And so before I even left Christianity, I need to say that I actually went into Catholicism to see if there was something there for me, because I was like, oh, non-denominational, oof, it's not cutting it for me. Maybe there's more in a more disciplined aspect of, I was looking for practice basically. What I need is very practical situation to attain what I'm paying for. You know, you go to church, you put bananas on the altar. That's your way of saying, like, I give you bananas, you give me stairway to heaven, right? But for me, I didn't feel like I had the stairway, no matter how many bananas I get. And why is that? Because whenever something happens, I still got angry, and it affected my emotions, and it destroyed my relationships a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And you see it like sand slipping through the fingers, and you don't want that. As a natural human being, typically, hopefully, you see your behaviors, and if they're becoming destructive, ideally you would want to go the other way, questioning yourself and changing accordingly. And so
absolutely. My first husband was of a particular Christian branch, and he talked about head of household while he drugged me by my hair down the hall and spent all of our money and yada yada yada. But so I understand being turned off, by Christianity for sure. And I have come around to really feel it again in a way that's very personal to me. But I do always say, I don't care what you believe, just pick something and go do it wholeheartedly. And if everyone did that, and so that's part of 4 Seeds of Self-Care. I don't expect people to go hell-bent on yoga and the discipline of yoga. Some people will, some people really do feel a calling for that. But when we're talking about the mainstream person that is just trying to move their body on a regular basis so that they ultimately can feel a little bit better as they move through their day, if I can just be a platform to offer them a little bit of encouragement through yoga, then I'm happy to do that. I know it goes so much deeper. And so I want to make the point too that a little bit goes a long way, but also a lot of it goes further. But we want to start where we are, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So tell me, how long have you been practicing yoga, and how long have you been teaching yoga?
So when he taught me the 5 rights, I really want to say that I practice Hinduist yoga and internal Buddhist meditations, but I do them in a very humanistic way. When we talk about yoga, when we talk about Buddhism, when we talk about the meditations that come with both of those lineages, typically our minds go into a cultural space, somewhere in another land, in another time. And in reality, the way I see these practices is the most effective and most fundamental human thing that we can do. And I just see that the sciences coming from the East are very clear, precise, and to the point, and very effective. And I see that certain religions have inherited bits and pieces of all of them. And what's happened over time is that we all have fallen in love with one or another branch and created different sects of religions, or even parts of the same religion, which are just specializations of different forms of practice. And all forms of practice are really important, but they're really destructive if we identify with separate limbs versus whole body. And in the past, it was easier to teach these things to separate limbs because certain people were just not even educated enough to accept more than that. But now, even low-caste people can read, which means that even low-caste people can read high teachings, but that doesn't mean that they're ready to receive high teachings. And what does this mean? It means that it's still happening today. There's tons of specializations, but what we need to understand is that every personality learns differently. And so this is kind of what I was bringing up earlier with, even if the myth is true or the historical evidence is true, neither of those make you a better person. Being inspired by the qualities of the religion or the belief and then changing yourself accordingly is what makes you a better person. And so, and you can have as much blind faith as you can muster, but it won't affect anything in a positive way. Blind faith is very destructive. And I only say that because even if you think you're swinging the sword correctly, you might cause a lot of damage on the way to where you're going if you don't know how to wield it correctly. And so if you practice compassion and love, even from Christianity, in a realistic way, personally, on yourself and your own personal relationships, you'll be cultivating the understanding of what's being taught from the Christ in a personal, in this moment, not in 1,000, 2,000 year time, but like in your own personal life, it will come to fruit. And based off of that experience, you inch yourself away from who you were before and into this sense of, we call ourselves baptized after dipping. Nothing changes there. The real baptism is when you avoid negative emotions and you become like Christ in this sense. And not everyone can drop everything and become like Christ immediately, so that's why there's different sects. But if we're all aware of all the sects, we can kind of like look at it like medicine bag, who needs what and how can we help each other reach the desired goal. And the desired goal in this case is not being driven by negative emotions and living more compassionate and loving life. And so if we're doing that, then we can see results, and then it doesn't matter what religion we follow. What all that matters is that it's changing us into a better person from last year, month, hour, day, minute, second. And what better person means in this case, and in my personal case, is in Buddhism we call it bodhicitta, some people call it awakening mind, but really all those are just concepts and words. If you really want to see the humanistic reality of what awakened mind means, is concern for others. And the only way you can have awareness of concern for others is if you've already developed concern for yourself. If you've already seen, oh, I'm not I'm not as healthy as I need to be, and I can't help anyone else in this condition. It could be mental, emotional, psychic, physical. And so based off of wherever we're at, we need to get help.
We need help.
Yeah, we do. And the problem with our Western culture is that we treat everyone like we're perfect already. And to a degree we are, but to another degree we are far from it. And we know that. And if we play this denial game the whole time, or think that because I believe in something I'm automatically good, then we won't stop development. And so what I've loved about Eastern traditions is that it's all about submission to the lineage, submission to the teachings. And why would we submit ourselves? Why would we prostrate to something? And it's because we're acknowledging that we are not that something. I am not the compassion yet. I am not the Christ. And it doesn't mean like wallow up in it. It means like, that means I should try to become more compassionate. How do you become more compassionate? Don't think negatively about the people you hate or love. Think about them and figure out how you can be constructive in the relationship. You know, why is there hate? Why is there resentment? The only reason why those things build up is because we don't investigate. It's kind of like, it's easier to hate someone that you spend less time with
right.
than it is someone you spend more intimate time with. And so our lineage is very direct. It's very much like you work on those things immediately. So if it's generally you start developing love and compassion with your mother, then, and this is a personal meditation, ideally you already have a good relationship with her. So a lot of people can't start with their mothers because they don't have a good relationship with them. So it's
or
like,
never knew them or whatever.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's whoever showed you the most love and compassion growing up. And then you work from that to the next person, until you can get to a point where you can start working on the people that hate you or want you dead. And bit by bit, you're developing something. And this is what I was looking for out of Christianity, but couldn't get. We were talking about everything, we were singing about everything, and but we weren't becoming anything different.
Yeah.
And so for me, and then when I went to the Catholicism, I was like, oh, wait, there's repetition of something. There's a practice.
You liked that.
And I thought I would like it. I thought I would like it until I didn't generate anything from it.
Yeah.
Because the prayers, the meaning was too far from me. I was too young, and it wasn't direct enough. Now, literally just thinking love towards so and so is very direct. You know, but praying the rosary is like, it's either here or there, depends on the meaning and depends on how much meaning you're holding within it. And it is the same with sending and receiving love towards someone in your life. I mean, you can do that without having meaning for hours and hours and hours and still not develop real love or compassion towards so and so. So you do have to be honest with yourself, and I think that's what my path is. You could call it spiritual journey. When people, this new age situation has diluted so many things. I mean, Buddhism, these words have become so much more than what they need to be. And when we say spiritual, our mind just takes off and goes. Rainbows, butterflies. But when I'm thinking about spirituality, and what I'm basing spirituality off of is the most normal, boring, but calm and peaceful state you could ever experience. And that's coming from personal experience. The most spiritual events in my life came from the most boring moments of my life.
Well, and they should, I think. The most spiritual moments for me have also been being able to be still in the moment. Just the other day, watching my kids take a bath, sitting with them together, not my older kids, my little ones, my 21-year-old, no, my 3-year-old and my 10-month-old, because it was the first time he ever got in the bathtub. So they were sitting, they were playing and, splashing, and I just thought, like, this is everything. This is everything. This is the spirituality, to be able to sit and be present. And boy, does that elude me most of the time. So when I'm successful at it, I feel it in every cell. And the other part of spirituality for me is, what you gonna do when things are not all love and compassion, not towards the person that you love, not towards yourself, or in an instant that you have no control over. What are you gonna do? And this is really why I had you on. I want you to tell me about your accident, and I want you to tell me who you were before, who you were after, and where you're at right now. And don't take 3 hours to do it. Just
Oh my
come
gosh,
on.
You'll have to stop me.
I will. I'm gonna interrupt you. Okay. I do love to hear you talk, though. I can just sit here and be mesmerized. So, okay, go ahead.
Well, it was
Tell me what
before
happened.
the event.
Before the event.
About 5 months before that, I received a call from one of my best friends who is known for doing all kinds of spontaneous travels. Very active, very physically fit, handsome man, but very wild, and gave me a call, just like many times in our lives together. Was going on another big trip and wanted to see if I wanted all of his belongings. Before, it was usually like, hold on to them for me, I'll come back and get them, or move him from place to place. And then I've had him help me move from place to place. We've lived together a few times. So long story short, I was like, no problem. And if you want it, then just come get it whenever you want it. And little did I know, he was actually scheming murder and suicide for something going on in his life. And he was just dumping all that on me. And so it was just like the next week and a half after I had received all his things, I went down to Florida to pick it up from his last Airbnb, and then and then I had it at my house, and I had even been talking to him throughout the whole week about certain things that I had inherited, like a electric bike with a sidecar that he built for Burning Man. This guy was a wild hippie, and long story short, that event was really traumatizing, and it began a spiral of after killing his ex. So it's a whole mess that I don't really know anything about. Honestly, we had been camping and climbing together all the way up into that previous October. He did this in February 14th, his birthday, and and I didn't know about that relationship, which is over a 10-year relationship that had been going crazy for the whole time. Come to find out, I also found out that I was the only friend still in contact with him, because I didn't know that he was bad off with everyone else. And so he had been successfully keeping me in the dark about a lot of things about himself, because he cherished our relationship in a really weird, manipulative way. And I guess I was a place where he could still have fun, because every time we camped and hung out and climbed, even with my kids with me, my son at the time, we were never not laughing. We were like in tears laughing all the time. There was never a moment of the day where we were hanging out where we weren't just like having the best time. Come to find out, that's probably why. He was just trying to get as much good out of that as he could, because he didn't have good anywhere else in his life. Couldn't produce it himself. And so that event led me to really question a lot of things personally, with my relationships with other people, my connections with other people, my attachments with other people, because I was really attached to that relationship, and then trying to figure out what to do with all those feelings was really interesting. So that was a spiral, and I'll admit that it took a lot of things for me to do to get through that. And this is 5 months later. We're building out a room for my son in the basement, and because of those events, I was really disembodied, and I didn't realize how disembodied I was, because I was trying to be an awesome father,
When you talk about disembodied, is it really just mentally not present?
Well,
what does disembodied mean to you?
Well, for me, we're disembodied right now, so that was extreme disembodiment. Because of the depressions, I was really separating myself from my feelings, because I just wanted to be a good dad. Little did I know I needed to be a good dad. In order for me to be a better dad, I should face my feelings and work them out directly, instead of just like bottling them up and just like keep on going, chugging along. And so I had a lot of, and still do, a lot of just pent up work that needed to be mulled over, and I wasn't, and kept just inheriting little tasks. The deal is that we distract ourselves with tasks and busyness. As much as we say we hate being busy, and we want to go to sleep,
I am the worst.
We basically run away from our problems by staying busy, and that's what I was doing very well. And so all that said, I had a lot going on in my mind when I was building out a room for my son. I wasn't really present for months at this time. So even the whole idea, I was being praised for building out the room, but you could ask my wife, leading up to that, I was just not really very motivated. I was just not. So on the outside, it looked like I was doing it, but on the inside, I was just not present. So very disembodied means not only just normal disembodiment, but like extra away from the moment. I was trying to be as far away from the moment as I could, because obviously the more present you are, the more upfront your feelings are, and the more you have to work with that. And so, so I wasn't ready to work with it. And I was building out with my father, and he was building out from a retaining wall, concrete wall with plywood, 2x4s, and hammering with a pistol nail gun situation, and asked me if I wanted to finish a few boards while he went to count for other 2x4s. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll hammer what you got left, and just went over there and started hammering away. And apparently we were using a steel hammer on a steel butt, and it's supposed to be a rubber mallet on a steel butt, and the hammer we were using was a floor hammer, which usually hits a floor nail gun, and the floor nail gun has a rubber butt that you're hammering. So it's usually steel to rubber, but I was doing steel to steel. I know, super confusing.
Whatever, just tell me what happened.
Well, long story short, there's chips of metal breaking off, and I didn't recognize that.
Because you're doing metal to metal.
Yeah, I didn't recognize that there was chips of metal breaking off the hammer every time it was being hit. Okay. My dad wears glasses because he needs glasses. I don't have glasses, and I wasn't wearing eye protection because I was just cleaning up and painting and stuff, so I wasn't even in the mindset of doing any hammering or anything. I was just going to do a few boards, and then on the second board, I just hammered, and the light went out in the left eye. I didn't know what happened other than I couldn't see. There was black floaties everywhere, and I just told them, Becca, who was trying not to faint, that I had to go to the ER immediately. My dad was like, are you sure? Because he's a construction worker. We're always like, are you sure? And I am very much so like, just take it. I'll take so much pain physically. And I was like, no, we gotta go. So he knew right away that it was pretty serious, and it was. We didn't find out till the next day, but the first day we just noticed that the pupil was broken, fluids were coming out, and there was metal inside there that needed to be taken out. So they sewn the pupil on the first day. Second day, when they found out something was in it, they just gave me a shot and pulled fluids. The shot was an antibiotic, just in case that there was metal and producing staph, and then pulling fluids was just to monitor what was in there best they could, like bacteria-wise. And sure enough, there was staph already developed in there, and it was metal, and it was the size of a small grain of rice. And the next surgery, which was a week later, was them going in there and taking the metal, which was like in the back of my eyeball, lodged into the retina, like right between some vessels. Had it hit any of those vessels, actually scratched one on the way out, it would have given me complete blindness. But I only have a little blind spot at the bottom right side, and I can only notice it if I look far left. Like the blind spot comes towards the center. But long story short, I just had really painful surgery. The shots in the eyeball was really intense and traumatic. The surgeries were not as painful until after, obviously, because I was put under for the surgeries themselves, but the recovery for the first few days of each one was pretty brutal, because just super sensitive, you're just a lot of pain. And I wasn't taking the medication that they gave me for pain because I didn't want to have to detox off of those things. So that opened my eyes, and also gave me plenty of time to focus on my internal things that I had not been working on. And I reached out to my teachers, and they gave me practices to work on accordingly. And most of these practices from my teacher, one teacher gave me super ecstatic, like Kundalini awakening. I was like, bro, I'm not ready for that right now because I just want to heal my eyeball. And the other teacher was like, let's work on love towards others and compassion and our relationships, basically the root cause of most of our negative emotions.
So let me stop you right there and go back to before it happened, disembodied, not facing your emotions or dealing with your emotions. This is not uncommon for the male species. Can you just explain to the ladies why it's so difficult?
Well, when certain behaviors are enacted, lived out, and inspiring others to enact and live out for generations and generations, they're very deep roots. And this is the same with treating women right. I mean, so many generations of treating women wrong. To want to treat women right is like an amazing thing, but really, do you want? Do you really? And it's another question because it takes a lot of honest work and humility and a lot of embarrassment, and those things for many, and we all have to understand for everyone's survival, just like women have to do crazy things to survive in society, men do crazy things to survive. I think most of these things, me coming from a place of trying to develop a little drop of compassion, looking deeply, we're all trying to survive. So men are just trying to survive the environment of men too, just like women are trying to survive the environment of men. And the easiest way is to just do what the other big dogs are doing, and the hardest way is to go against that. And so just if you think about it, you don't have to think much because we've been brutal for a very long time. And to go against the thousands of years of, 10,000 years of animal husbandry and agriculture is like 10,000 years of us actually like living in our heads. Before that, we were hunters and gatherers. We were very sensual and we were very much like embodied with the environment around us. But since we've been since we've been domesticating animals and forming businesses, we've been living more and more in our head and competing accordingly. And the playground is very aggressive. And if you just look how men see success, it's very aggressive and it's very harmful to the environment, it's very harmful to their relationships, but that's what they've normalized for a long time. And so I think that acknowledging anything different is already almost chaotic. It's risking your life in a sense. Mm. It's risking your status in the locker rooms. And so I think it's just pure ignorance and survival. Ignorance as in lack of awareness, of education, lack of awareness. Same with female anatomy. Look at the way men treat women in the bed is just very much a lack of awareness, lack of education. And if we were just more formally educated, if we were raised in a situation where there is more awareness towards both sexes and how things, I mean, even the most enlightened societies are very sexist. Mm-hmm. And so this is deep root, like super deep. And even in most spiritual communities I've been a part of, there's rape. There's on the most minor level, maybe not rape. Maybe the monasteries are so happy that they don't have any bad monks, but still, what are the women doing in there? They're doing all the hard work, and so that's sexist. And so I think that it's really unfortunate, but we have to, like many things, swallow the bitter pill of realization that all of our activities, whether female or male, are coming from instinct and from thousands of years of instinct and exposure to bad habits and normalization of bad habits. And who is going against this grain? It's usually 0.1% of the population. And those people are not usually living or even accepted in normal society, because society depends on aggression and depends on competition and it depends on cutting down and running up. and especially in this culture now, it's fake it till you make it, which means that like in the olden times, you at least were rising up because you had skills, but now people with no skills are somehow becoming top of the pyramid.
Right.
And this is really bad for the whole world. But so
where
I
did
think
you come? What happened now with your healing of your vision and your healing of your vision?
well, everything in life is waking you up a little bit more if you are acknowledging it and taking it in. If you're not acknowledging things, then I mean, we have all the lessons that we need, especially if we're in a relationship with other people. And that is unavoidable because we have to be in relationships with other people. It's more like if we're not in denial of our relationships with other people, if we're really living with other people, then we recognize that that living is not so easy, but the more we become workable within that, it becomes fruitful and better for everybody. And so I think it's just natural experience. Just like the spiritual lineages, it's all from experience. What is working, what is not working? Oh, that's not working, let's not do that anymore. And just like right now, they're modifying themselves to be less and less sexist as as their awareness is brought to their sexism. Well then let's fix that.
Mm-hmm.
Wise people are doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Unwise people are like, oh, shut up, this is how we've been doing it, this is how we'll keep doing it. But wise people are like, oh, you feel unappreciated, then how can we change that? What can we do? Real human beings are workable. In my lineage, we are really interesting conversation about this is if you want to be a human being, it's based off of your desire and ability to change yourself from one form to another. And in this case, it means from less negative to more positive, a more workable person. Because we're already closed off to other people. Like I was saying, open mind means concern for others. And we're not automatically concerned for others. We're automatically concerned for me, oh my, I. And the extent, sometimes maybe my family too. Sometimes more my animals than my family. But even dogs and other animals love their families. They go to work, they find what they need, they take care of all those things. So if we want to be more than animal, there needs to be more than that, because we have people that are successful families, everything's going good, but look at the relationships. Are the relationships successful? Very questionable. And so the question in where I'm coming from, I don't want to say Buddhism because I'm practicing Buddhism, but where I'm coming from is, are we doing more than what animals are doing? Are we really using our brain? Because our brain is different from them, and look at what they're doing. They are also in tribes. They are also fighting off their family, but we can do more than that. We can maybe choose not to fight. That's more than an animal. Animals don't know how to do that. They only know how to fight back and protect. And so this is just pure desire of what's not working and what's working better. And what I mean by better for myself is my negative emotions, when they get the wheel, destroy me.
Right. Well, and that's it. In order to foster the more meaningful relationships, in order to be aware of that stuff, you have to look at yourself first.
Absolutely.
There's no way around it.
Mm-hmm.
And if all of us spent time doing that first and foremost, what a wonderful world it would be.
And I think that's where we're getting there. I mean, the technology, the phones, the addictions, the short attention span, going against the grain of evolution, because, I mean, if you think about evolution, the short attention span and losing of memory and young ages is the opposite of evolving. And so once we fully realize the negativity of this, then we'll be treating time away from the phone like we do now, time with the phone, like, oh, charging up my battery. And
I think we're starting to understand too, don't you?
Through experience.
I do, exactly. I feel like now it's starting to come around the other way, like, oh, it's not so great after all. Oh, maybe well, you know, they say that the makers of iPhone or whatever don't even let their kids
Silicon Valley.
touch
Silicon
a
Valley.
phone or go to school where there's any electronics, right? So they're knowing something.
Yeah, and they are also running the very market as well, and so they are knowing and they're manipulating, which just shows you that you can't trust other people. Mm. You can only trust yourself, and then maybe the people that are the quality that you're wanting to achieve until you realize they're not, and then just keep moving.
You can only trust yourself, but you can only trust yourself if your mind is right, if you're in the right space to
for sure.
To decipher, right? Whether you are trustworthy.
Yeah.
And so again, you have been the prime example of how complex we can take this, but also just how simple it really is. That it indeed starts with us. It indeed starts with our self-care by those basic disciplines, basic practices of your nutrition and moving your body and finding time in quiet, in stillness through meditation or prayer or whatever your practice is.
Yeah.
And adequate sleep so that your brain is functioning as optimally as possible, so that then you can go better your relationships, but also deepen any practice or discipline interest that you want.
It's very simple if you look at it based off of every other form of development. I mean, to become a good piano artist, to become a good dancer, I mean, the warm-up is an hour. And then the practice is maybe another hour and a half to 2 hours if it's a really serious practitioner. And it's really funny how we praise those qualities and the artists. Oh, like we know they're where they are because they spent the time. And the doctors, we praise that, the sleep that they lost in order to get to that state. But when it comes to our own fickle emotions and working on those, it's fake it till you make it, and you can't develop something you're faking. And I think it just comes down to treating it like we treat everything else, and it could be simply educated just like everything else. Like we're saying here, sleep, we won't give it to ourselves unless we're reminded properly, unless we have a community of people to support that. If the environment of society is just all about money making and how you make it, they don't care. And they actually praise people that die making it. Think about that. But do they praise the people themselves? They don't know who those people were. They don't know how to have compassion for that. And so I don't know. With great sacrifice comes great wisdom and knowledge, but nothing comes easy, and even harder is it if there's no education for it. So, and in religion and all these things, again, they talk around the bush. The potential is there, but a lot of it takes just honesty and workability, the desire to be workable. But that takes experience. I mean, you don't realize how unworkable you are until you probably ruined a few relationships. And for a lot of people, especially for a lot of guys, they think that everything's great, and how could it be terrible? No matter how many relationships that they have destroyed or that have just been destroyed that they're in, it's never our fault. But it is, and it always is on everyone's side. And this is where what some people call spirituality, but I call just the desire to be human, comes into play. And it's an immediate moment, and it's really always in the immediate environment. Spirituality, when you say this word, even that becomes somewhat cultural. Like we think about it in a cultural way, or some kind of way that's
I'm not religious, I'm spiritual.
Yeah, and what I'm getting at is that I'm trying to be human. I'm trying to be more than a dog. I'm trying to be more...
What did you learn or take away? How did your injury change you?
So, obviously, I got injured, and that meant long time of no work and a long time of recovery. So I had all the time to think about a lot of things that I had not been thinking about. And on top of that, I was doing that recovery in the home with my son. He was 2 and 3, turning 3 at the time, and my wife. And again, we use busyness to avoid a lot of the things that our relationships provoke and bring up. And when you are not even allowed to be busy because you're too injured or something, then you really, and this is why a lot of people who are stuck in situations like this produce a lot of wisdom really quickly, I think personally. And it's because there's nowhere to run and the relationships will keep bringing the things up, and typically we see those things as enemies, the emotions, whatever comes up. And so that's why we think it's good to avoid those things. It's good to cover those things up. It's good to smile for the camera. But in where I'm coming from, it's not good. And so it gave me the opportunity to realize a lot that I was avoiding in my relationship, even though I was doing everything that looked good in the relationship. And this is the very thing that I didn't want to become. And I love my parents very much. I'm really connected to my parents, but there's a lot of inspiration from my family that I have, and it's based off of really wanting to be what I say, and not just saying, like, I want to say what I mean and mean what I say. And not
Can you
just,
give me an example?
Well, when I say that I love my wife, I want to mean it, and I don't want it to be a joke. I don't want it to be like, oh, I love her, but because that's what you want to hear and that's what I want to say. No, I want it to be true. And love in this sense is not what you get as good feelings. Love in this sense is your ability to give yourself up. Because if you're feeling good, obviously it's easy to love. I mean, that's a no-brainer. But when it's not easy, like what you're saying, that's when you start seeing, it's like the Beastie Boys song, you don't know yourself until you're up against the wall. And relationships should do that. Unfortunately, modern relationships, we avoid the fruit. We avoid anything uncomfortable. We do whatever we can to avoid it. But really, relationships are a great opportunity for us to just always be on the spot, always have a spotlight on us, so that we can see who we are all the time, which means we can work on ourselves all the time. And so I was able to see so much more anger in myself, resentment in myself, jealousy in myself, you name it, every negative emotion, which is in all of us, was all there because I had my son jumping on me, forgetting I'm injured, and then me snapping at him and then realizing, why snap at him? He's just running around. So like all these lessons over and over again. I finally got to be a woman in the sense of like, you know, the great thing about women is the menstrual cycle and birth and those events giving you this continual opportunity to just learn about yourself. And indigenous cultures, I mean, it's highly praised upon what is learned. And that's why I've heard from, I don't want to say I'm a white guy, but I've heard from someone who's said they're Native American that I don't know, but that the sensitivity that's provided from menstruation gives women immense wisdom that men don't get. And that was one of the core reasons why certain practices like sweat lodges were even created, so that men could have some kind of opportunity to become as sensitive as women already have the ability to be, because life gives it to them all the time, once a month at least. But then you're dealing with the boys, and then you're dealing with the children, and then it's just ongoing from there. But look at men. We have this amazing opportunity to avoid our suffering the whole time. Even in the least sophisticated societies, even in the most impoverished environments, we always look like we're taking care of ourselves a little bit better than women. Why? Because we can avoid a lot more suffering. Women, as much as we want to avoid, menstruation is coming. All these things are coming. Even if you use different techniques to avoid it, it's coming. Whatever it is, you can't avoid the realities of life. And then what I mean by realities of life is you can't avoid the fact that everything's changing. That's what in my school we call karma, or it's change. Suffering, when people talk about suffering, they're like, oh, they think that it's always like painful suffering. But what we mean by suffering in our practice of Buddhism is that everything is always changing. So that's why when we say all the good things are suffering too. Why is it suffering? Why is a great thing suffering? Why is my love for my family suffering? Well, because they're gonna die one day, and you're gonna die one day. And when you're alone, your attachment can cause great suffering. And so it's not the family, it's not the love and all the goodness created in the moment. It's the attachment to that leads us to dark depths.
So we can go on and on and on and
yeah, I know. You gotta be careful.
This is, yeah. But for the person that is just beginning to understand how important it is to spend time with themselves and really understand what it means to be self-centered. And where I thought the conversation was really going to go more yoga based, I feel like it's more about meditation today / prayer and awareness of self. And I just wonder if you have any advice on where does one simply begin?
At birth, when the ball of suffering starts rolling. I mean, really, if you do meditate, you'll go before that, and then before that, and you'll see that it just keeps going. But with what you're saying, and the only reason I say this is because I don't want people to think that meditation, yoga is a cultural thing or something designated for certain people.
Right.
It's something that we're actually already doing.
Right.
I mean, yoga postures, we're in a posture all the time. And as soon as we go from one posture to another, we're doing dynamic movements, we're doing vinyasas. And so all these Eastern practices are just more conscious movements, more conscious vinyasa, more conscious rest, more conscious awareness, more conscious awareness, I mean, is meditation, more conscious activity, working with your awareness. But on a purely primordial level, we're striving for that. This is why, like Dalai Lama says, we all want happiness. Why is he saying that? He's really just trying to say the truth, and it is that everything we do is out of this desire to preserve ourselves and to tap into a part of ourselves that we know is who we really are. And why we do that? Because we don't think that what we are right now is who we really are. The example for this is our lack of satisfaction. If we knew who we are, we wouldn't need to keep consuming as much. The root of our overconsumption is this idea that maybe if I get this or that, I might feel closer to who I am, or figure it out, whatever this is. Even if we have absolutely no awareness of those thoughts, that's kind of the drive. Everything's coming from that. And so even if we have no awareness of meditation, no awareness of meditative practices, whenever there's a moment where you're just stuck sitting there and feeling everything and just seeing everything, that's an automatic state, that's automatic presence of meditation. You got to think, the very, very first person, how did it get started? It's human. It's not like Indian, it's not Nepalese, it's not Buddhist, it's not Hindu. It's literally just this experience, and once you feel that, you create more space and more activity for that. So that's where the consciousness comes in. It becomes more conscious. So obviously you do more symmetrical postures, because that leads you to being able to sit more calmly, and sitting more calmly leads you to be able to rest in that open space that you felt whenever you felt it.
But very simply, if we are just sitting, breathing, and watching our breath in and out, we're already doing a vinyasa, correct?
Yeah.
In and out.
It's very subtle, but it is, yeah.
It is a vinyasa.
Yeah.
So we're
Inhale,
meditating and doing yoga.
Yeah, but the more awareness, the more we breathe consciously, the more we benefit, the more, because we can be breathing unconsciously and be closing in, breathing real narrow breaths, and then whatever amount of the lungs is not being used is collecting dust and cobwebs.
And we have all felt when, we're going through doing an activity or whatever, and then all of a sudden, like, I don't even remember how long it's been since I took a full breath.
Mm-hmm.
And just the difference in just how every cell of your body drops down a notch, and you feel more present, and you feel more able to connect with someone or finish your task or handle a potential problem that just comes in.
Yeah, I think the very beginning is realizing you're not there. And then that really usually comes after you've experienced someone who may be a little bit there. Maybe they're not like perfect. And it's good to have teachers that are not perfect. It was really good for me to have Govinda in my life. It was really good for me to have Forrest Sage in my life. It's really good for me to have all these random hippies in my life because they showed me that I could get to this point that looks high up, but still be acting the same real low. And that's a really good lesson to learn really early. And it goes to show that your ego can evolve too. That's really the situation. You can think that you're evolving, but it's your ego just covering up the situation. And the situation is continual procrastination. And so I think that it comes with honesty, but honesty is hard when you don't have any exposure to anything different. So when you're in a crowd of chickens and you're an eagle, you're gonna think you're a chicken. Mm-hmm. And it's not until you see another eagle acting like an eagle, you're like, oh my God, like that's really cool. I wanna do that. And then it's only a matter of time until you realize you have that potential, and then you can actually be doing the same activities. But if you don't have exposure, then you won't know. And so I think first, obviously, is you see more peaceful people, more loving people. For me, it didn't have to even be people in connection with yoga or meditation. Even certain people have no connection with that have inspired me greatly because they have decided to be more peaceful. They have decided to not cultivate negative emotions like it is so easy to do. And so really, I think it comes from general inspiration. Oh, well, so-and-so has gone through this, but like they're handling it a little bit better. There's this general desire of like, people look up to you and they're like, oh wow, she's handling this, in their opinion, a lot better. And that's why we all get drawn towards each other, and hopefully it's good qualities, but it goes for negative ones too. I mean, look how negative qualities are developed. Look at society.
Well, and also I will say, yes. So this is something, that really we need to clear up here because you talk about the different teachers and, you only could go so far with them, and then obviously you realize that you want to go a different direction. But it wasn't for naught. The benefits of having those teachers in that space at that time was always helpful. And for you, to look at me and say, people are inspired by you. That's wonderful. But there's also people that are hurt by me.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are also people that are angered by me.
Yeah.
So none of us need to be looking anywhere else except ourselves. And like you said, looking for the ways to be the most loving and compassionate.
Yes.
Because we lose it the minute we start thinking or expecting anybody else to fill that for us.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're going to end because, like I said, we could go on forever.
Okay.
Do you have something else you want to say?
Whatever you want.
I just want to tell you that I am super grateful to have you here, and it's a conversation that I always welcome with you because it can go so many different places.
I could end on one more note.
Please.
If we just think about what's going on in our lives, like I was saying, the whole busyness and using busyness to avoid the immediate moment. When we calm down, when we relax, sometimes intense situations provoke that. Something happens and it forces you to just like sit in the
You
room by
literally
yourself.
lose your vision.
It creates this gap, and the gap is where we can start tapping into the real thoughts. Generally, we don't have gaps. We're responding very quickly with each other, and we don't have the opportunity to even think deeply about what we're saying. And so I think that the main place for everyone to start is recognizing that the most fruitful place is those gaps, and that can go. It's not a religious thing.
I call it the space between.
Yeah, absolutely.
From one thing to the next. If you can increase your number of gaps.
Yeah.
Throughout the
and
day.
Expand them more and more, because if you can expand them, it takes time to develop peace. It's a muscle. Compassion is a muscle. Love is a concern for. I don't want to say love because love is sometimes associated with good feelings, but I mean concern for others, which is usually painful. It's not easy to do. It's like a muscle. It needs to be developed, and this is why I wasn't developing that muscle with the rosary. I was developing that muscle when I was literally thinking about people in my immediate life during a gap, and then choosing, instead of thinking negatively, but to think more like love, compassion, positively, and cultivating that and developing that muscle. So first off is the gap, and then second off is recognizing we got muscles to develop. And then third is exercising those muscles more and more and more. But I think it's just the contrast of activity. You know, everything we're trying to fix with more activity. We look to fix our situations by researching more things rather than just looking at what's already there. And so I think the best place to start is just recognizing that peace is usually found in the gaps, those spaces between, and then recognizing that and working on it and expanding it. And the more we can expand that peace, the more we can create time to rest, the more that rest remains within us even when we're in the activity. And you asked before, how do we maintain these things when everything starts coming at us? And I think that this is what the Christ was a full battery of compassion. And because he had 18 missing years to develop something like this, he could have already been born that way. I understand that that's a belief system, but what I'm getting at is what do we do? We weren't born that way.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to say, oh yeah, he did. But for us, we have to cultivate something. And so I think it's creating the space for that first, and the second is recognizing that there's something that could be developed and then developing it accordingly. Instead of expecting, because when we talk about generosity, love, and compassion, we immediately, I'm compassionate, I'm loving, because we want to believe that about ourselves. But if we're not exercising it, it's not going to get developed. And we automatically go to negative thoughts and emotions, even with positive intentions. And so really it's just changing that, recognizing that we're trying to cure everything with more activity. Let's try passivity. Let's try to be more passive. Broaden the gaps. More gaps, like you're saying. I say maybe few gaps, morning and evening, and then maybe they'll get bigger and bigger. If your schedule doesn't, then maybe it needs to be little gaps here and there. But our problem with, and I just want to say this, is our problem with right now is that we fill those gaps with staring at a phone. We fill those gaps with listening to music. We fill those gaps with staying around other people and talking to other people. And those are all forms of distraction.
And the gaps are there. It's like you said.
They're there.
They are there. Yeah. And if you say you don't have time for it, then that's exactly why you need to find the gaps.
Yeah. And so it's all about that.
Thank you, Justin.
You're welcome.
Amen.
Amen.
I appreciate it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I can just talk and talk and talk.